I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. Today, we're joined by Alex Neve, one of Canada's leading voices on human rights. He's an international human rights lawyer who has served as Secretary General of Amnesty International Canada for 2 decades and is this year's Massey Lecturer. His lecture series and new book are called Universal: Renewing Human Rights in a Fractured World. At a time when human rights are under strain globally, including right here in North America, Alex argues that the principle of universality still offers hope if we have the courage to embrace it. He's here to talk about why this moment, as fractured as it feels, could still become human rights' finest hour. Thank you, Alex, so much for joining me today in the studio.
It's wonderful to be here.
And you have a connection to St. Andrews as well, a Sir James Dunn Academy graduate. So
Absolutely.
How incredible is that?
I kind of think of myself as having 2 hometowns. I was born and lived my first 14 years in Calgary. But we moved to St. Andrews when I was 14, so grades 9 through 12. And this remained where my family has been ever since. My sister, Neve, lives here. We come back all the time. So it's a very special corner of the world for us.
Well, I'm always fascinated by how many people find St. Andrews just a special place in their hearts and have ties to it. How incredible that you are one of them. I'd love to start off talking about why this isn't our finest hour when it comes to human rights globally, but why this might also be an opportunity for us to pivot and make the most of where we're at now.
Well, I probably don't need to say a lot for people to start nodding their head about how dire things are in our communities, in our country, and obviously globally right now. I think people are feeling it in ways that perhaps has not often been the case. I think even though human history is full of times of tragedy and crisis and war and environmental disasters, etc., I think for many of us here in Canada, perhaps, fortunately, we felt protected and shielded from a lot of that. We've enjoyed the good life here, right? We've not been at the front lines of war and conflict, even though Canadians have obviously served in wars. And so some of that darker side of our world has seemed very distant. And I don't think anyone feels that anymore. I think, and that's for a variety of reasons. I think, number one, we live in this small, very connected world in which instantaneously we all have news about everything on our phone, whether it's the latest horrific violence happening on the ground in Gaza or the latest manifestation of a weather crisis and the climate disaster. The latest craziness to come out of the White House and Donald Trump's latest executive order. We're kind of living and absorbing it all the time. I think also there is something different about the kinds of crises we face in our world right now, where they're not just a series of these are emergencies that need solutions. A lot of it really fundamentally goes to who we are, how we live our lives, how our societies are organized. And I think especially when we come to something like the climate crisis, which isn't just about bad weather. The climate crisis has its origins in how we have set up society. It's about consumerism. It's about capitalism. It's about how we do business in our world, what we privilege and what we don't, etc. Things that we don't even think of ourselves as making choices about. And in that regard, maybe the easiest word to use is a lot of it has become truly existential. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, makes all of us, whether it's in a town like St. Andrews or in Canada's big cities like Toronto or anywhere around the world, everyone is feeling this moment. And many of us, we come from different perspectives, we have different realities, we have different privileges. But many of us are feeling the same kinds of fear and worry and distress, all of which I think is pointing to many people, younger people in particular, wondering not just what is the future, but is there a future? You see incredible polling from young people, especially a lot of the climate polling, which shows a very, very troubling percentage of young people not having faith and confidence that there is a future. So that's the world that we're trying to make some sense of right now. Mm-hmm. And I think many of us are looking in many different directions for solutions. I think some people hope and imagine there's some sort of easy fix. And that's where I think some of the paltry and ineffective efforts to do something about the climate crisis arise, for instance. Some of us may still be trying to pretend it isn't happening. I think a lot of people still are blocking out the absolute horror of genocide on the ground in Gaza right now, for instance. You know, if I don't turn on the news, if I don't read the paper, maybe then I can pretend it isn't happening. But that only goes so far. I think we're all absolutely feeling it and needing to look for those solutions. That brings me, I guess, to the second half of your question is, what are those solutions? And obviously what I've been exploring both in the book and then through the lecture series is the extent to which human rights. I think everyone hears those words, and there's lots of things that come to mind. Some people may think very legalistic things about, oh yeah, that's the Charter of Rights and court challenges, or that's when they discriminate against you when you're trying to rent an apartment and you can take it to the Human Rights Commission, etc. But at its core, human rights is something absolutely fundamental in our world, especially in these last 80 years since the end of World War II, when the United Nations was created, and we brought together what people often hear the term the international rules-based order. And right from the beginning, this isn't something that they got around to in the 60s or 70s. Right from the beginning, states, governments knew that a whole new understanding and approach to what human rights is in our world had to be at the very foundation of this better world that was going to rise from the absolute horror of the combination of the Second World War and the Holocaust. And the grandiose beginning of it all was in 1948, and many people have probably heard of it, maybe others not, when states drafted and adopted what's known as the universal, focus on that word, universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that really was the catalyst for everything that has come since in our world. The plethora of UN human rights treaties and resolutions and declarations and meetings and committees and commissions. But it's also the spark that did lead to things like our own Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It set us on that path. And it really lays out the roadmap for what a safe, a just, a sustainable, an equitable world and society looks like. But here we are, almost 80 years, and have we lived up to any of that great promise? Obviously, there's a very small cohort of people in the world, wealthy white males, most of them, who have great enjoyment of human rights, but billions of people around the world, that is a dream far beyond reach, and their human rights are violated every day. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, I emphasized very intentionally that word universal when I talked about the Declaration of Human Rights. And I think we really need to sit with that word for a minute, because it's an incredibly powerful word. It's a very unusual word to be used in international law. Most international treaties are called, the International Treaty on this or the United Nations Treaty on that. Universal is something that is almost more kind of philosophical and poetic to name something, right? Which I think was very intentional. But obviously, and I think we all intuitively have this understanding of universal, it means all of us, always, everywhere. And what could be the more perfect vision and understanding of what human rights surely must be all about? So that is what is promising and uplifting and powerful. But the other thing about universal is we don't need to sit with it for long to realize, to admit to ourselves, that's where we have betrayed the promise. We have betrayed the promise in that we have never come close to really meaning it when it comes to universal. We have, and I'd say we've all either directly or indirectly been part of it, or we've stood by as bystanders, or we've surely benefited from this world which has instead created human rights as a club. You're in, you're out. And it's not a handful who are out. It's not thousands or millions, it's billions of people who are outside of that club. And so I think Universal gives that as this opportunity to fill ourselves up with what is so important and beautiful and meaningful about the promise of human rights. But it also gives us an opportunity, I think, to give ourselves a talking to about how we have betrayed that promise in disgraceful ways. But we can turn that around.
We can. And I want to hold up the cover of your book, which comes out September 2nd. I'm lucky to have this copy here in advance. When we think about history, and if we forget it, we're doomed to repeat it. It's a thing you hear a lot. But that goes, when you think about World War II, how many people are still living that have vivid memories of that? Mm-hmm. And because of that and where we're at now, how do we light a path forward? I think that you used the word bystander, and it is very important right now. I think there's a lot that we're very aware of, thanks to the news cycle and our phones having new breaking news for us every second, but that can make you feel powerless as to what to do, especially when we're seeing it on our own continent right now. When we look at what's happening south of the border, human rights especially, I think of trans people right now and what they're going through in the US. How do we make sure that we do what we know is right, and silence not being part of that?
So let me start with the end part of that. I think silence not being part of it is absolutely essential. I think it's easy to retreat to silence and inaction for a whole host of reasons, and I don't even say that necessarily standing in judgment on people. Silence may, yes, come from a problematic place of someone is actually absolutely fine and supportive with what is happening in the world, so they're not going to say or do anything to change it. But I think very often, and you reference this, it comes instead from a place of, but who am I? I have no power. How could I do anything, especially in today's world where the challenges, the nature, the scope, the consequences of what's happening in our world right now feels so enormous, so insurmountable. How can little old me do anything about what's happening in Ukraine right now? How can I possibly be the person who's going to end the climate crisis? How am I going to be the one who turns around all the hate emanating from Donald Trump, right? So it's this sense of powerlessness. And I think, therefore, now is a more important time than ever to really zero in on some of the fundamentals of what we are to each other in our shared humanity. And that's connectedness, that's community, our collective power. And I guess the word that I would use to unite all of that is solidarity. Being together, standing with one each other, having each other's back, and being very attentive, in particular right now, to those who are the most vulnerable. You referenced the trans community. I think that's a perfect example where, in this horrific world of division, hate, and polarization, hate against the trans community has been weaponized by so many politicians, from Donald Trump down, but across Canada as well. And the trans community is also a community that is particularly vulnerable, that has often been marginalized, that is therefore particularly susceptible to human rights violations. That's a community, therefore, where that call on all of us to, in whatever way we can, demonstrate and show solidarity is so important. And I think it's one of the reasons why people maybe often shy away. Well, there's many reasons, but one reason that people shy away from kind of getting involved or taking a stand or speaking out is I think people often have this vision that you either have to be all in or nothing, right? That if you're going to do something, you're going to have to be, it's going to take up several hours a day, and you're going to have to be leading protest marches. And of course not. We need so many different ways for people to make their contribution. We can't all be leaders. If we were all leaders, it would be a disaster. There's so many different ways to play a role. And for some people, maybe it's writing a check. We need resources to fight these fights and wage these struggles, absolutely. For others, maybe financial support is an impossibility, but they've got people power. They can be the one who do show up at a protest. And this may not be some sort of big, high-profile protest march in front of Parliament. It may be just a handful of people who stand together in a vigil on a street corner in a small town, etc.
I will tell you, I saw it right in St. Stephen when they end of January, lights across the border, particularly for trans people. And what I was there for a news story. What I didn't expect to see was lights come back from the U.S. side. And every once in a while, you are brought to tears when you're doing the news. And that was one of those moments to see rural New Brunswick and Maine as well stand together in this moment.
And I think that idea of the lights coming back, that picks up on something so important that I think people are constantly surprised with when they do come out of their place of silence, when they do find their voice. Maybe it's also finding a bit of courage to take those first few steps, to write some letters, to call an MP, to show up for a protest, and then to suddenly find common cause and realize, oh, I'm not alone. It's not just a handful of us. Even here in my small town, there are other people who feel the same and have the same sense of worry. And that is so, it's kind of a companion to solidarity. And I talk about this a lot in one of the lectures, empowerment, and what a force that is. What a force for good, what a force for change. And you get those two lined up together. Solidarity, we're together. Empowerment, we can do things, and we can change the world. Everything that is good in our world, every advance we've ever seen, going back to the abolition of slavery and to votes for women and, more recent things in Canada like same-sex marriage and the struggles around sexual and reproductive rights and the right to abortion, etc. All of those great advances have all been from the people. Mm-hmm. Not just because some wonderful government suddenly on their own decided, oh, we will bestow rights. It all comes from that place of solidarity, empowerment, struggle, and refusing to stay silent.
When we look at something more complicated like Israel-Palestine, I think a lot of Canadians can feel overwhelmed by the topic. They fear they don't know enough to even put words out into the public sphere. How do you recommend people navigate understanding what's going on, but also, if they want to take a stand, do something that is meaningful and also helpful?
So I think there's different ways to become involved in what's happening in Israel-Palestine right now. Some of us, I'm a lawyer, I'm an international lawyer, so I tend to gravitate to campaigns and efforts that are very much focused on legal solutions. What can big UN bodies like the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court be doing? What does international law have to say about what's happening on the ground in Gaza? How can we ensure some accountability, etc.? And if people are drawn to, that's how they approach conflict, that's the kind of, that's more the justice and accountability agenda for our world. There are so many organizations, groups like, my former organization where I was previously the Secretary General, Amnesty International. Go on their website. The Canadian website is amnesty.ca. They have all sorts of learning materials, background reports, but also very importantly actions that people can take. And because it's the Canadian section of Amnesty International, it tends to be very focused on what can we be pressing our government to be doing. I think for other people, they approach this struggle as from a kind of a people-to-people perspective and are perhaps more drawn to some of the incredible efforts that are underway to build bridges between Jewish and Muslim, Israeli and Palestinian communities. And there's a lot of that out there. It's very inspiring to check out some of those resources. There's conferences involving speakers from both communities reaching out to each other, building understanding with each other. That kind of initiative needs support as well, including financial support. So I think it's about finding your place in it, and maybe for us as Canadians, it's recognizing. And this isn't always the case with mass atrocity situations in our world. This is one where Canada actually does have some influence. We have significant influence, a very close relationship with the Israeli government, for instance. That's not always the case there's a horrific conflict playing out in Sudan right now. Neither of the parties to that conflict, whether it be the Sudanese government or the militia group, the Rapid Support Forces, none of them care that much about what Ottawa has to say to them about anything, right? So there it's harder to find that leverage. But here, we've got leverage, and beyond leverage, we have things that are troubling. We know that there are even arms sales from Canada still going to the Israeli government, etc. There are economic dealings between the two countries which may be benefiting some of the illegality of what's happening, etc. So this is one where I think we as Canadians can, you don't need to feel overwhelmed by this is big and global and who am I. You can focus your efforts on, okay, I'm Canadian. Canada has a role to play here, and how can I use my voice to shape that?
You have also looked intensely at how climate change plays a big factor in human rights going forward. And I think, on the East Coast, when we're so close to the water, even people like the fishers in our community see the lobster migrating north. We're very aware because we are so intensely intertwined with nature. But I'd love to hear from your perspective what you see as the next big human rights hurdles as they are related to climate change and what will be in store for our world going forward.
It's interesting. It took quite a few years before the world, and this was both within the environmental community and the human rights community, sort of agreed and recognized that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis. There was, even within those two communities for quite a while, there was a tendency to, well, that's about the environment, not about human rights, right? Environmentalists and human rights advocates were thinking that. Years ago, that finally came down, and we recognized, this is actually all about human rights. It's at its very core. This is about the right to be able to continue to thrive and live and survive. What is a more fundamental human rights imperative than that? Well, that's great. Is that a nice thing to just say, okay, it's a human rights crisis? And the real question becomes, well, what does that change? What does that give us in terms of different advocacy tools? What does that give us a different avenue through which we can hold governments accountable for their disastrous climate failures? And it does. It absolutely does. That, I think, is why it's so important to increasingly recognize the climate crisis as it's not just that we're interested in the latest calculations from scientists, which we absolutely need, showing us how things are continuing to get worse. We need to combine that with the human rights framework that says, and that's not okay. That's unlawful, that's illegal, it's a violation of some of the most fundamental principles of international law. There not only can, but must be justice, accountability, redress, and remedies for that. Human rights brings the hard-hitting side of things into environmental science. And I think, even though we're now in that place, we're still, I think, revving up our engines of really bringing everything that a human rights approach can and urgently needs to bring to the climate struggle right now. And the Canadian government's been a bit of a laggard. I mean, we know the Canadian government is a laggard more generally when it comes to a lot of climate action. We still subsidize, fossil fuel companies in this country in the range of billions of dollars every year, at a time when we need to be weaning ourselves off, obviously one of the greatest contributing causes to this climate disaster. We're still not just allowing it to go on, but we're funding it. So there's just so many ways in which bringing a human rights lens to that, and there are interesting strategies going on as to whether there's human rights legal challenges, et cetera, that can actually be brought to something like the fossil fuel subsidies or simply the failures of the Canadian government I pick on, but governments around the world to do what they're supposed to. Late last year, there was a groundbreaking ruling from a tribunal known as the European Court of Human Rights in a case brought by a group of elderly Swiss women against the Swiss government, their government, claiming that a number of failures on the part of Switzerland to live up to its climate targets, etc., wasn't just lamentable or problematic, but at its core was a violation of their human rights. And the court agreed. It was one of the first groundbreaking international rulings we now have that firmly situates the failure of governments to take climate action as a human rights violation. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what starts to cascade from that.
If Canada is to stay being a leader when it comes to human rights, what do you want to see our country do going forward? Where are we maybe falling behind right now? Where could we do better?
We need to actually show that we actually mean it. I think we have this tendency to wrap ourselves in the human rights flag, and we're still in some corners globally seen as, oh yeah, Canada, they're the human rights good guys. And I've certainly I've done a lot of work at international level. I've been in and out of many UN meetings. I've been in frontline human rights investigations in war-torn zones, etc. And whether it be from refugees or from diplomats, the number of ways I've heard back coming at me, oh, you're from Canada, well, you guys have it all figured out, don't you? And obviously there are some great things that Canada has done, both domestically and contributions we've made on the world stage when it comes to human rights. I think, though, and this is a sad commentary, but I think it's beyond dispute, most of that is looking back and further back into history. There was some great moments in the late 90s, for instance. Some people will remember when Lloyd Axworthy was our foreign affairs minister and Canada was leading the charge around banning landmines and protecting child soldiers and the creation of the International Criminal Court, etc. You really do have to look that far back to find those examples. So I think first and foremost, we need to find our feet again. And we have right now, I think, too much of a tendency, and this has been through both, I'm not being partisan here, we've seen this from both liberal and conservative governments over the last 25 years or so, that human rights that's a secondary consideration. It's nice words for the press release, but we just don't invest the resources, we don't take the risks, we don't really devote our diplomatic capital to kind of trying to lead hard-hitting human rights initiatives on the world stage. And that's why in the book and in the lectures, when I do get to this point of, what's the agenda going forward, I have a 6-point agenda, but the first one is we have to start putting human rights first. Sounds pretty simple. It's unbelievable how rarely we do that. It's always that's what we'll get to next, right? We've got to get the business arrangements. We've got to get the trade deal finalized first. Then we'll figure out human rights. And we've just got to stop living our lives that way. To go back again to 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has stirring words right at the beginning that says, regard for universal human rights is the foundation of peace and justice in our world. Not the roof, and not the backyard. It's the foundation. It's where we have to begin. And so there's so many ways in which some of them may sound a bit kind of bureaucratic and boring. I call, for instance, on the federal government to, and we've never had this, why don't we have, at federal level, an international human rights action plan, something that guides every aspect of our dealings on the world stage, whether it's the things we're doing at the United Nations, whether it's the kind of international trade we're pursuing, whether it's the nature of our bilateral dealings with other governments, something that is detailed, comprehensive, and provides guidance, but is clearly about putting international human rights first. Things that are that maybe that is simple, maybe it's not, but to me it's obvious that we're not ever going to get to this place of putting human rights first if we haven't laid out the tools that we need to get there.
It scares me as a journalist when I do watch a lot of American news, and I can see some broadcasts being all the more careful right now. I don't even know if careful is the right word, sometimes quiet on certain topics and how they address them. What role do you think the news media plays in making sure these things come to light in a way that's meaningful?
journalism is fundamental. I mean, I think in many respects, journalism is, I think you can say this about many things, but it is certainly one of the lifebloods of a healthy democracy, and is certainly, you know, the currency of human rights protection. You know, courageous, independent journalists who, well, it's a tired phrase, but it means so much, speak truth to power, expose injustice. There are others who do that. Human rights researchers and advocates do that. You know, Indigenous land defenders do that. There are many people who play that role in society, but journalism is so much at the core of it. And I think there's two things we have to very much keep in mind, therefore. One is journalists are under threat. And it's not just the business model is collapsing. We know there's that challenge of, you know, what is journalism now in the era of social media? And there's still a lot to be figured out there. I wouldn't pretend that's my area of expertise. But what I am particularly concerned about is the way that journalists are under attack. Literally, I mean, we've talked a couple of times about Gaza, for instance. It's staggering now, the number of Palestinian journalists on the ground in Gaza who have been killed since October of 2023, right? By far the highest number that have ever been seen in any conflict. I think there are some figures that say that if you added up all of the conflicts we've seen since World War II, it still is not as many journalists who have been killed on the ground in Gaza. Why is that not the top news story every night? We're not paying attention to that extreme example of it, but it's everywhere, where it's death threats or abductions or extortion attempts. And the Canadian government has been part of trying to launch some initiatives over the last 5 or 6 years. Back when she was Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland played a key role in this, a former journalist, of trying to strengthen some of the global level mechanisms to ensure that journalists are protected. That's absolutely vital. The flip side, though, is we see far too much irresponsible, bad journalism in our world, which no longer chases the truth. Is journalism for entertainment value? Is content, not just negligently so, but deliberately so, in spreading lies and misinformation? I don't have an easy answer there, other than, you know, often I do think it's really important that we take power back in our hands. We're the consumers of that journalism. If we make it clear that that's not the kind of journalism that not only that we're not interested in, but that we fundamentally reject that kind of journalism, you know, then maybe we're the ones who have the best chance of shifting that dial. So I think there's those two aspects of journalism and human rights that we need to be very attentive to.
For those who get to hear your lectures or who are able to pick up your book on September 2nd, what are some of the key takeaways if people could just take away a few things that you hope really resonate?
I'm actually just going to say one, and I think it's come up a couple of times in some of our other question and answers, but it really is, the power is yours. I mean, I think we have a tendency when it comes to human rights to kind of look elsewhere, to think, well, it's up to governments to protect my rights. It's up to governments to give me my rights. It's up to others to stop violating human rights. And I think that's never been the case. But now, more than ever, to truly understand that human rights are not just for the people, they're from and by the people, and we're the people. It's not okay just to be hoping and assuming that somebody else is going to do what needs to be done to make sure that human rights thrive. And when there's so much at stake right now, when the status quo we're facing is one of, and I'll use strong language here, you know, climate doom, of hate ripping apart humanity's bonds, of atrocities destroying entire peoples, this is the time to grab onto that power and look for the one thing you can do this week, the one petition you can sign, the one conversation you can have with a neighbor, the one thing you can learn about some human rights issue you've never thought of before. Whatever it is, take that step. Don't be silent. Take some action, and in that, be sure and confident that it matters. You have power, especially going back to what we were talking about earlier, when it's in solidarity. And we live in a world full of solidarity. It's not always easy to see it, but it is there everywhere. That solidarity is incredibly powerful, and we can move mountains, even the kind of enormous, frightening mountains that are in front of us right now.
Well, I appreciate your time so much today. I'm so proud that you have the connection to this part of the world, and I look forward to reading your book in full. Please come back whenever you are back in St. Andrews. It means a lot that you are here.
Well, I'd love to, and I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Vicki.
My guest today has been Alex Neve, international human rights lawyer and author of Universal, Renewing Human Rights in a Fractured World. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.